So today I'm going to talk about requesting special education evaluations for your internationally adopted child. The point of ESL services is to level the playing field for a child that doesn't speak English. So the idea is that a child that's receiving ESL services should be able to access the same curriculum as English-speaking peers and progress at the same rate as their English-speaking peers because they're being offered adequate support. If these things are being provided to your child and they're still struggling, then you may want to consider that they need a special education evaluation. If you know that your child was struggling in their native language, in their native country, if they were behind peers, if they were doing poorly in school, then you already know they were struggling. And requesting a special education evaluation is very helpful because it's going to give you information on what's going on with your child, exactly what areas they're weak in, and exactly what areas they're strong in. You know, what are their strengths and their weaknesses, and where are the discrepancies. It'll also tell you what their cognitive ability is, and those results have to be interpreted, a little carefully with an older child that's adopted internationally. But the point is that the evaluations will really give you a good picture of your child, where their performance level is, if there are gaps in their knowledge. So you can send an email to the principal of your child's school, and it can be as brief as, due to the struggles that my child is having academically and the concerns that I have as a parent, I would like to request special education evaluations. And you can sign it and send it. And it is date stamped and time stamped. You always want to communicate with the school district in writing, and email is my preferred method because it always has the time and date stamped. If you make a verbal request for evaluations, they can very conveniently forget that. They can very conveniently say that they didn't understand what you were asking for. They thought you were just discussing it. So there's all kinds of excuses they can have if you don't have it in writing. So always, always communicate with your school district in writing. So once you make the request for the special education evaluations, that starts the school's timeline. They are legally obligated to complete the evaluations within a certain amount of time. So once the evaluations are complete, you will have an eligibility meeting with the eligibility team, and you will be a part of that team. There will be the evaluator. That's usually the school psychologist. There will be a classroom teacher, special education teacher, an administrator, and yourself. So there are multiple disability categories that your child can qualify for special education services under. In order to receive special education services, a child has to be found eligible under at least one category. A child can be found eligible under as many categories as they qualify for. So at this meeting, they're going to present the data. You should receive the results of the evaluations at least 3 days prior to the meeting, because you absolutely do not want to walk into the meeting and be handed 4 or 5 evaluation summaries and then be expected to make a decision on all of that information when you haven't even had time to absorb it. So if the school district does not provide you with the evaluations before the meeting, request it. If you walk into that meeting and that's the first time you saw those evaluations, request that the meeting be moved, because there's no way for a parent to absorb that amount of information and then make an educated decision, or be able to really be an advocate for their child, because you're just not going to have time to sit there in the meeting and read through page after page of evaluations and understand what it means, and develop any sort of a plan. So get the evaluations ahead of time, or tell the team that you need to reconvene after you've had time to consider the evaluations. That is completely within your right. You don't have to be rude about it. You can just very simply state that you need more time. So once you're in the meeting and you've been over the evaluations and you understand the data, you have it in front of you, they're going to pass around the checklist, and they're probably going to ask you, is there any category that you would like us to consider? And you can request to consider as many categories as you feel could possibly apply to your child. And they'll probably ask you, which one do you want to do first? It really doesn't matter. You will go through the checklist with the team, and there will be different qualifications. There'll be little boxes that you have to check in order for your child to be found eligible. At any point that they don't find your child eligible and you disagree, say so. Make sure that it's noted. It is absolutely within your right, and you should disagree verbally if you feel that the decision is wrong. So if your child is found eligible under one of these categories, one thing that I've experienced is the team will then say, well, great, that's it. Your child has been found eligible for special education services. They only need to be found eligible under one category to qualify, so that's great. Let's wrap it up. No. You should go through every single category that you feel could possibly apply to your child, because services are driven by the disability that your child qualifies under. So take cerebral palsy, for example. Orthopedic impairment is one that a child with cerebral palsy will absolutely qualify for because they have orthopedic issues. However, orthopedic issues does not speak at all to the brain damage that a child has with cerebral palsy that can impact learning. Specific learning disability would more appropriately reflect a child's learning issues than orthopedic impairment. However, if a child only has orthopedic impairment on their IEP, the school district can then use that as an excuse to say that your child does not qualify for math or reading services because it's really hard to justify a child with an orthopedic impairment needing help in math. That's not legal. It's not really true, but it is an excuse that I've heard. So definitely request to go through all of the eligibility categories, because a child with cerebral palsy, most likely 80% of kids with cerebral palsy have a visual impairment. Children with cerebral palsy often have a speech disability. Children with cerebral palsy can have multiple disabilities impacting their school performance. They can have anxiety. So you definitely want to go through everything that you feel could possibly apply to your child. Don't let them brush you off at the first one. The other thing that can happen is you can go through all of these checklists, and the district can find your child ineligible time after time. They could say, no, they don't qualify. No, they don't qualify. One issue that I repeatedly ran into was they continued to use ESL as an excuse for the child not qualifying. So what you can do if that happens, if you feel that your child absolutely has a learning difficulty and the school district finds them ineligible and you're just sitting there kind of like, okay, so now what, guys? Like, my child's having trouble and you're saying they're not eligible for additional services. What are we supposed to do to help this kid? What you can do is disagree with their findings, simply on the basis that you feel that more information is needed. So on the signature page, there's a box that says dissenting opinion, and you're going to want to check that box, and you're going to want to write your reason for disagreeing with the team's findings that your child was found ineligible for special education services. And you can do this even if your child was found eligible under one. Say your child was found eligible under orthopedic impairment, but the district refuses to acknowledge that your child has a traumatic brain injury and a visual impairment. You can agree with them finding your child eligible under orthopedic impairment, but you can disagree that they found them ineligible under the other two, and you can request an independent educational evaluation, an IEE. You can request that at the school district's expense. And what that will do is you will be able to have your child evaluated by a private evaluator, not affiliated with the school district, and you will get a second opinion, a complete second opinion, with a lot more information, hopefully more in-depth information, to bring back to the table and reconvene with the eligibility team for a second time. to determine whether or not your child is eligible for special education services. So the school district, they probably won't tell you about the IEE up front at all, but it's definitely within any parent's right to request this. So once you request it, they're probably going to hand you a list of evaluators that they work with, and they're probably going to tell you that there's a spending cap, that there is a limit on the amount of money that they're willing to pay an evaluator. You're not bound by either of those things. You can ask them, you can say, can you please show me the law that states that I have to use one of the evaluators on your list? And can you please show me the law that states what the spending cap is for an IEE? And there's not one. So it is totally within your right to find your own evaluator. What I did when I was handed the list was I called every evaluator on the list, and I asked one question. I said, can you please tell me what kind of experience you have working with internationally adopted children? And every single one of them on the list said, well, we don't have experience working with internationally adopted children. That's not really what we do. And I said, okay, great, thank you, bye. Because there's no point in continuing the conversation. They're not going to be helpful to you. You need to find someone who is experienced working with internationally adopted children, who understands the language acquisition issue, who understands that a child that had a disability in their native language is going to carry that disability into their newly acquired language. You need someone who understands trauma. You need someone who understands the impact that it can have on a child in the educational setting. You absolutely do not want to get a second opinion that only backs up what the school has done. You want it to be more in depth. You want to bring more information, more educated information to the table from someone who's experienced and qualified working with kids like ours. So definitely call around. Do your research. Find someone that has worked with internationally adopted kids. If you cannot find someone who's worked with internationally adopted kids, then at the very least find someone who works with adopted children, foster children. The trauma aspect cannot be understated. Trauma in and of itself, I feel, should be a disability category because it impacts education that much, and you need someone evaluating your child who understands that. You do not want to get a second nail in your child's educational coffin by getting a report from someone who does not understand your child. We live in Virginia, so our social worker recommended Dr. Federici. He's in Northern Virginia. He is very well known in the adoption community for evaluating internationally adopted children. He actually travels all over the United States and evaluates children. So we had him do neuropsychological evaluations for our kids, and the school district paid him for it, for all 4 of the kids. And that's how an IEE works. You choose your evaluator, the school district pays them for the evaluation, you get the report, and you bring it back to the table with all of your additional information for the team to consider. One thing that I would highly recommend is if you get to this point in the process, you want to have an advocate. And I know that's so much easier said than done, because I had people tell me over and over, get an advocate, you need an advocate. And I would call around, and advocates are $200 an hour, and they're backed up for months. I have 4 kids. It's going to cost me a second mortgage on my home just to have a phone conversation about all 4 of them. What you can do is look for maybe like a pro bono law firm. There's a law school around here that actually runs a clinic that helps families who are having issues with the school. They bring in law students that are overseen by a supervising lawyer, and they come to the meetings with you as your advocate. And that's what I did. We had to be accepted to the program, but it's definitely something you can do because you don't want to continue having this fight alone. If you've gotten to the point of needing to request an IEE, then you need some more support. You need to be backed up in the meeting room. I cannot recommend getting an advocate enough. However, I understand how difficult it is. So if you are unable to find your advocate and you have to go back into the meeting room yourself with this IEE, then okay, you can do that. I've done that. So you go back into the meeting room when they're supposed to be reconsidering this new information, and one of two things can happen. Hopefully, they're going to be very receptive to it. They're going to be like, wow, awesome, we just are so grateful for this information. We knew there was issues with your child's learning, and we just didn't know how to help them, and we're so glad to have these recommendations and all of this information, and we go through the checklist and use the new data to find your child eligible and use the recommendations in the IEE to write an IEP to support your child. That's the best case scenario. That never happened for me. I went back with the IEE and I got a whole lot of, well, we're not disagreeing with his findings, but we don't see evidence of this here at school. And I got a lot of, well, we see that he's recommending this program, but we use a program a lot like this already, and it works really well. All of our kids with dyslexia are in this program, and that's what we do here. It might be what they do here. That does not make it legal, and it does not make it best for your child. So if you get into a meeting and you're finding that it's not going as you expected, they're not taking the recommendations seriously, you are looking at a report that states that your child needs X, Y, and Z, and the school district is either claiming that, one, they're already offering it, or two, your child doesn't really need it, then you're probably just going to want to, you can continue to disagree. You can say, well, I really disagree with the way that this is going. I don't feel that your findings are accurate. I feel like you're not considering the information in this report seriously. And you can go to the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights website, and you can file a complaint. I did this. It's quite simple to file a complaint. They don't really require a lot of information up front. You just briefly describe your issue, and you file a complaint. Because if a child has a disability, the school district is required to provide services for that disability. And if the school district refuses to acknowledge a disability that a child has been diagnosed with, they're not qualified to do so. That's not their job. The people sitting around that table are not qualified to disagree with a diagnosis. Their job is to consider the data in front of them, not disagree with the data. So if what you're getting is just a lot of disagreement with the data, then you're going to want to just file a complaint, because the Office of Civil Rights can come in and they can do an investigation, and they will have your IEE to look at, and they will have the school's data to look at, and they'll be able to say, here's what the law says, and here's what you're doing, and here's what you should be doing. And it can be very helpful to have them come in and basically force the school district to provide your child with what they need. We had OCR come in and tell the school district that they could not deny children that had an ESL plan special education evaluations, because sometimes school districts will do that. Our school district told me that a child that does not speak English cannot qualify for special education services. They basically said a child cannot have an ESL plan and an IEP, and your kid has an ESL plan, therefore they can't qualify for special education services. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, okay, so are you seriously telling me that learning disabilities only occur in English? Like, this is ridiculous, and it absolutely is ridiculous, and it's not legal, and it's like some backwoods mess that was going on. So if you get pushback like that from your school district when you request special education evaluations for your ESL child, then just go straight to the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights and file a complaint. It's been investigated before. It's been determined. They're going to come in and tell your district, sorry guys, you're absolutely wrong. You are required to evaluate this child. And if your child's found eligible for special education services after the Department of Education comes in and investigates your complaint, then your child will be provided compensatory services, meaning that if you requested your child be evaluated for special education services, say 6 months ago, and the district refused, and then you had to file a complaint, and Office of Civil Rights had to come in and do an investigation and find that, yes, this child should be evaluated. And then you get the results back, and oh, your child does qualify. Well, then retroactively, your child should get compensatory services dating back to when you initially requested an evaluation. So I hope this is helpful, because I've dealt with a lot of issues when it comes to trying to get special education services for a English language learning child. There's a lot of different terms. They'll call them limited English proficiency, English language learner, English as a second language. It doesn't matter. The point is that your child can have an ESL plan and an IEP, and you can sit down with the team and you can make sure that those two overlap so that your child gets ESL services and special education services provided in a way that meshes with their schedule and their academic ability and their language acquisition level. So, hope that's helpful. Thanks for watching.